Welcome into another edition of the Women's Basketball Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things women's college basketball, WNBA, Unrivaled, and oh so much more. I am Mia O'Brien, joined as I am each and every week by the one and only Mitchell Northam, AP voter for the win, Baltimore Banner, you name it, he has it covered in the wide world of women's basketball. Mitch, how's it going on this fine early start to, I don't even know what week this is of the women's college basketball season. I know we just wrapped up week 2 of Unrivaled.
Yeah, I guess we're more than midway through at this point. But yeah, we got lots to talk about. We got a coach had a baby. We got a big WNBA trade. We got upsets. We got lots of fun stuff.
Lots of fun stuff, so let's get right to it. I do want to note we will have more not Caitlin Clark talk, folks. More Vanderbilt talk. What? We'll get to that here in just a second. As we do each and every week, let's begin with our Her of the Week. Traditionally, this is a player, Mitch, who 9 times out of 10 has statistically outperformed the rest of the field in the nation. This week, for the very first time on the Women's Basketball Podcast, we're giving the honor to a coach. We have been counting down the weeks. Kim Caldwell, one of the more insane stories of the women's college basketball season. Not only has she certainly guided Tennessee to a top 15 ranking in her first season at the helm on Rocky Top, but she also has been doing so while 7, 8, 9 months pregnant. The baby boy is finally here. Shout out to her husband, Justin, and shout out to Connor Scott. That's Connor with one N. And shout out to assistant coach Jenna Burdett, who stepped in and was the interim head coach for Tennessee as they almost upset Texas on Thursday night. And Mitch, part of me wonders if Kim Caldwell may have made a difference, but then there's the other half of me that says the baby bump is coming once she comes back.
Yeah, we'll see. Tonight, as we record this podcast here on Monday night, they are currently leading South Carolina with about 90 seconds to go in the first quarter, 14-9. So, yeah, maybe we're getting a baby bump here on a big Monday. Tennessee has lost back-to-back, but they're having an awesome year in year one under Kim Caldwell. I think expectations are high. If they can give South Carolina a run for their money tonight, that'll be big. They've also got a big matchup coming up with UConn on February 6th on ESPN. So renewing that rivalry, which will be super fun. I think one of my favorite parts of, all the congrats to her and all the baby stuff was Tyler Summitt, son of the late Pat Summitt, tweeted out a photo when he was presumably just a few days old, and Pat Summitt is kind of holding him and giving him a bottle, and she's on the phone. I have to assume on a recruiting call of some sort because the work never stopped.
Thank you for not referencing Kim Mulkey's gift to Kim Caldwell, because the main character energy was alive and well. In case you missed it, Kim presented Kim a gift because Pat had once presented Kim Mulkey a gift when she was pregnant with her first child, and they were both coaching against each other in the late 80s. But we know Kim Mulkey, the Jerry Jones of women's college basketball, loves to make it about her. We're glad to make it a little bit all about Kim Caldwell. And yes, as we record this podcast on Monday night, now number 18 Tennessee, they did slip after that 80-76 loss to the Longhorns. They are in front of South Carolina, a team that we will also get to in this week's starting 5. But before we get to some of those biggest storylines in college, Mitch, we have to begin this week's starting 5 in the W, a massive trade between two teams out on the West Coast that, in my opinion, not only shifts the power structure in the WNBA, but perhaps could give us some new faces of franchises. What say you?
Yeah, so in case you missed it, Kelsey Plum is now with LA Sparks. Jewel Lloyd is on the Las Vegas Aces, and the Seattle Storm now own the number 2 pick. I think there's a few different ways you can look at this trade. So let's start with the Seattle perspective. I think it's clear that Jewel Lloyd wanted out. That was a broken marriage that seemed beyond repair. I think that you got the number 2 overall pick for her is a victory. Before I get into the other teams, I think how my evaluation of this trade will be shaped kind of depends on what happens with Paige Beckers and Olivia Miles. Paige Beckers is, as we've stated many times, without question the best player in this draft who has the potential to have a long and fruitful WNBA career as the cornerstone and a superstar of a franchise. But as we previously discussed, the Dallas Wings are kind of a dumpster fire of an organization. And so what if Paige refuses to play for them? What if she pulls an Eli Manning? We've talked about that. So if the Wings opt to trade out of that number one pick because Paige says, hey, I ain't going there, they're going to be looking for an enticing trade package where they don't move back that far. So Seattle, in my opinion, now is in pole position to orchestrate such a trade and potentially flip an unhappy Jewel Lloyd into Paige Beckers. And if that happens, I give this trade an A+++ for Seattle. Also, if that happens, it's not a great look for the Sparks, who had the number 2 pick. That now goes to Seattle, and they now get Kelsey Plum. But I think if you have the choice between Paige and Plum, you probably take Paige, especially when you're trying to build sort of a long-term core around Cameron Brink and Rickea Jackson, also 2 young players. But there's no guarantee, as we just talked about, that Paige is going to pull this hypothetical Eli Manning thing. She might go to Dallas. She might do a deal with someone else. And remember, she could still stay at UConn. So if you're LA and you have the chance to get an in-prime Kelsey Plum, an Olympian, an all-star, really one of the faces of this league, to lead and pair with Brink, Rickea, Derek Hamby, you do it 9 times out of 10. Especially considering, let's assume Paige does go number 1. Who's the number 2 pick in this draft? Olivia Miles hasn't declared yet and hasn't given any indication that she's leaning one way or the other. So if you're LA, you have this new coach with Lynn Roberts. You're going to have a full season. You think of a healthy Cameron Brink. Take the sure thing. Also, Lynn Roberts likes to shoot threes. Kelsey Plum happens to be a great three-point shooter. The last team in this, Vegas, I'm not totally sure why they did this trade because, in my opinion, you gave up the best player in it in Kelsey Plum, and also a 2026 first-round pick. And I think Jewel Lloyd is a great player and probably a better defender than Plum, but probably not as gifted as a facilitator and not as efficient as a scorer. I think for Vegas, this was simply an effort to shake up the roster after underachieving in the playoffs last year. And we'll see how it works out.
I came away from it wondering if Kelsey Plum wanted a fresh start,
Mm-hmm.
and that's fine. She's entitled to that. But yes, I personally don't see, because correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't want to make either of them sound like they are older than they actually are. So I do want to confirm this. Okay, so Jewel Lloyd is 31 years old. Kelsey Plum is 30 years old. Okay, that's what I thought. I thought there was only a 1-year age difference there, so I did want to confirm that. So again, I don't think that it's like you're getting, let's say, a player who's 26 and just entering her prime, as opposed to someone who is still in the prime, but maybe on the second half of that stretch of their career.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's an upgrade in that regards. I agree. I think this is Kelsey Plum wanted to get away from Vegas, wanted to go out on her own, kind of like Justin Timberlake wanting to get away from NSYNC. No hard feelings. She just wants to do her own thing. And respect to her, and I hope she has the Justin Timberlake career and not the Nick Lachey career. So, I or Joey Fatone or whatever.
Or Lance Bass.
Lance was able to at least like salvage.
He did some things.
He did okay. Point being, that's how I view that side of this trade. I'm going to rattle off for you, according to Spot Track, the Seattle Storm contracts that are currently under contract for 2025. And you tell me, Mitch, like Skylar Diggins-Smith is technically under contract for 2025. Azzy, I always butcher her last name, so you hit me with that one. The center.
Yes, it starts with an M. I
always butcher it. So
yeah, apologies to Ezzy.
Apologies, Ezzy. Jordan Horston, Nika Mule, who is coming off of a significant knee injury. Lee Ureri, the what's she like 6'8" center from China, and then Gabby Williams, who was cored last week. And so we still also don't know the situation there with Gabby Williams, who many believed if she was to hit the open market would be one of the top names in free agency, especially given she's 28 years old. She didn't play last year because of her commitment to her national team. And so perhaps maybe there's some more tread on the tires. What that says to me, especially knowing Nika Mule's coming off of a knee injury, like it's Skylar Diggins-Smith, who you probably could flip at this point in a complete rebuild. And so that's where I wonder if you're Paige Beckers, do you want to go to that complete rebuild after playing at UConn, perhaps the most consistent program, not named South Carolina, the one recession-proof program over the last 2 decades?
Yeah, I think if you're Paige, you're going to go to a rebuilding program probably either way.
But
If your
one
choices are,
in Dallas, at least as of this writing, have Arike Ogunbowale and some other
yeah,
pieces like J.C. Sheldon.
right, maybe. I think there's still a lot of uncertainty in what happens in free agency and trade season. I think Arike could move. I think Skylar Diggins-Smith could move. And then, I know Paige has said this is probably her last college basketball season. But what if UConn comes up short? What if they lose in the Elite Eight? It seems to me that she's somebody who really cares a lot about winning a national championship and being one of the best players to ever play at UConn. And you can't be in that club if you ain't got a ring. So we'll see. Yeah, it's super interesting. I think there's still a lot of pieces that could be moved around. But yeah, I think this was simply a trade, kind of a perfect storm.
Unintended.
If you're the LA Sparks, to get Kelsey Plum out of it, because I think this was a situation, where maybe you just had these two all-stars, Jewel Lloyd and Kelsey Plum, who just wanted something different. And if you're the Sparks, you benefited from that. And I think a team coached by Lynn Roberts that has Kelsey Plum running the point is going to be a lot of fun. And I hope that Cameron Brink is healthy, and I'm ready for year 2 of Rickea Jackson. And De'Erica Hamby sure seems to be excited about the trade and reuniting with Plum.
And how about Azurá Stevens or Ray Burrell? The little Rays, those are some names that, hey, maybe they're not the banner headliners per se, but have certainly looked the part at different moments during the Unrivaled 2-week season that we have seen so far. So there's more pieces in LA than I think we really give LA credit for. When Lynn Roberts took that job, I remember sitting here, and maybe it was during one of our practice podcasts. I remember sitting here, Mitch, and we were like, man, like Paige is going to want to go there just because it's LA and Cam Brink's already there and they can hang out and she can model on the side and like have fun in LA as opposed to Dallas, which is still a fun town. But at the same time, maybe a little bit more dysfunctional per se in terms of where the organization is headed. But now I look at that roster and I'm like, man, like Paige may want to go there because then there's less pressure to be the face of the franchise, even though I do think she enjoys having that weight on her shoulders.
Yeah, for sure. I think those are now the two big dominoes left in terms of the draft. Is Paige going to declare, and is Olivia Miles going to declare? Olivia Miles essentially was kind of robbed of a college season there with her knee injury. I kind of wonder if, depending on how the end of the season goes for her, if she wants to run it back one more time with Hannah Hidalgo. She really hasn't given any indication whether or not she is going to declare for the draft or not. So those are kind of the two big dominoes, because if Olivia doesn't declare, I don't really know who the number 2 pick is at this moment. If we assume Paige goes number 1, is it Anissa Morrow? Is it, I don't know. It's really, if those big time players don't declare, it kind of weakens the draft class as a whole. It's not really a super strong class, I don't think.
I think because we're also comparing it to last year's rookie class.
Yes.
It's a bit unfair. And honestly, we're probably also comparing it to next year's rookie class, which will be
loaded. Yeah.
By Juju Watkins, among others. Speaking of those college stars, let's kick it on over to the college ranks with number 2 in this week's starting 5. Mitch, I was locked in yesterday. God love Coach Yo and Ole Miss. Led most of the way at home against Texas before ultimately falling 61-58 in a real dandy in Oxford, Mississippi. Unfortunate, though, for the Rebels. Would have been a nice win for their resume and to bring them perhaps back into the top 25. But the real story yesterday, little did I know, because I believe this game was on ESPN Plus and I just didn't find it as I was flipping around. Vandy knocked off another top 25 team in both men's and women's basketball. The women's team is in the AP top 25 for the first time in 11 years. And quite honestly, Mitch, I'm not going to lie. I think there's more sustainable success in the women's program, or at least the hope of more sustainable success for the women's Commodores program than their men's counterparts. And it has everything to do with Michaela Blakes, who, again, if Sarah Strong didn't exist in this world, Michaela Blakes would be the runaway National Freshman of the Year favorite. She dropped 33 points, her second straight 30-plus point performance, and a 66-64 win over Alabama, which got me thinking. We've talked so much, especially since both of us are AP voters on the men's side, in that top 25. I feel like as a nation, as a college basketball community, we've spent so much time talking about how on the men's side, This is the best the Southeastern Conference has ever looked in its history on the hardwood. It is the best conference in basketball. I think you can make the argument it's the same on the women's side as well. Even if there's only 3 SEC teams in the top 10 compared to 5 on the men's side, there's still 8 SEC teams in the top 25, which is comparable to what we've seen in the men's side over the last few weeks. And it's with all due respect to the Big Ten. Certainly the addition of UCLA and USC, in my opinion, is what has made the Big Ten continue to be one of, if not the most competitive conferences. But we spent so much time early on in the season complaining about conference realignment that I really don't want to give USC and UCLA all that much credit for strengthening the Big Ten, because they shouldn't be in the Big Ten, Mitch. Those traditional powers in the Big Ten have been up and down throughout the bulk of the season. So give me the SEC as the best conference in women's college basketball as well.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a case for that. On the women's side, they aren't as, I think, top heavy as the men's side. But certainly, you know, those 3 teams in the top 10, South Carolina, LSU, and Texas, all have a good shot of making the Final Four this year. And then you have, you know, kind of the back half of the league, or not really the back half, but kind of that next tier, you know, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, Alabama, Tennessee. Those are all teams that we're talking about, and Vanderbilt, I think, is right there with all those teams. You mentioned Michaela Blake's. Camille Pierre is also a really good player for them, who's played well lately. She had 20 points in their win over Arkansas, 21 in their win over Tennessee, and a double-double in their upset over Alabama. So, yeah, Vanderbilt is humming right along. You know, they made the NCAA tournament last year. Coached by Shea Ralph, you know, UConn legend, state of North Carolina legend, one of the best high school players ever from North Carolina. She's building something special there, I think. And I think they're a lock to make the tournament, and I think they're probably going to surprise some more teams along the way. And like you said, I think this is more sustainable in the women's basketball side than it is the men's. I think you'll probably see Vandy, you know, if not in the top 25 for the rest of the season, certainly this is not the last time that they'll be in the poll. They've got some real momentum and some real good young pieces to build around.
We love the Doors, especially with the other flagship of this program, or at least our favorite trendy team, the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, losing 4 of their last 6. I think we've become a Vanderbilt podcast, and I'm okay with that. Staying in the SEC, the biggest game of the conference season was moved, Mitch. The Southeastern Conference had to move a game due to a snowstorm. Yes, that's reality, and it has nothing to do with conference realignment. These 2 teams were in the SEC last year. It's LSU. It's South Carolina. You were brave enough to put this in your Making Money with Mitch segment last week, and you did hit on it. We won't get to those other picks. We're not going to talk about those times. But for me, Mitch, before you give us your take coming out of that South Carolina victory, I just want to begin with, I was disappointed that this game was at 5:00 on a Friday. I texted you and our producer, Dimitri, and maybe there was a scheduling conflict. I don't know what the scheduling conflict was for ESPN. I got home a little bit later on Friday because of all the chaos with the Jacksonville Jaguars coaching search. And I went and got my nails done. And I come home, I make dinner, and I'm ready to lock in for 7:00. And I see it's the 4th quarter already. And again, this is one of the marquee matchups, and I understand it was moved out of prime time due to a natural, you know, a weather disaster. It happens, but it was just disappointing because more people should have eyeballs on that matchup, and it's better for the sport to have it in prime time.
Yeah, I was a little disappointed that the time slot it got moved to. I'm not sure exactly what the schedule conflict was. You know, South Carolina is playing tonight. And LSU had a game on Sunday, so you probably didn't want them playing like a back-to-back on like a Saturday at noon type of situation. A little bit of a bummer. You know, I went to a bar to watch this game because we cut the cable cord at my house. Typically, I can watch most things, you know, either via streaming or a digital antenna that I bought. But when something is just on the mothership ESPN and not on Plus, I have to get a little creative in finding the game. But I was kind of surprised. I went to the bar, and, you know, they had a bunch of TVs, and I had to ask them to put the game on. I just figured most bars are kind of already tuned in ESPN. The bartender obliged. I had a burger, some Old Bay tots, and a beer, and I watched the game.
What else could you ask for on a Friday,
It was
especially
great.
a
Yeah.
10-point game that, at times, like, I was a little worried about you covering the spread because there were moments where South Carolina, to be clear, looked like they were running away with this one, but it's a credit to Anissa Morrow, and I'm sure Kim Mulkey wants to complain about some of the questionable foul calls and reaching fouls, but ultimately it did, I guess, kind of come down to the wire, question mark, maybe not compared to some of those other SEC games we just talked about.
Yeah, I think, from the game action, I was really struck by how aggressive South Carolina was with Anissa Morrow. They treated her, rightly so, like a superstar, and that they beat the absolute hell out of her every single time she got the ball. I don't really think Anissa was fairly officiated. Kim might have a point there. I think there were times where she couldn't buy a foul on the offensive end, but got called for breathing on Sanaya Fegan on the other. But that's how the game was called, and the Gamecocks took full advantage of it. All that said, I think this was a classic South Carolina performance. Joyce Edwards and Sanaya Fegan played really well and held down the paint. We've talked a lot about South Carolina not having a true center, a dominant center, but, they got the job done. Raven Johnson made a few nice plays defensively. Tahina Powell created some offense with a few assists, including that insane over-the-head pass to Tessa Johnson, where she hit just one of 2 3-pointers that South Carolina made in the game. LSU takes their first loss. My takeaway for the Tigers is that they needed more from Michaela Williams and Flajay Johnson, who combined for just 11 of 35 shooting. When the defense locks in on Anissa like that, you need those 2 players to play better. The other thing that happened with this game was, there was some post-game drama that I just wanted to, kind of talk through briefly. For our listeners who might not know, when this game ended, South Carolina's in-arena DJ played this song, Cut Friends by Camouflage. This song came out in 2001. For folks that might not know, Camouflage is the father of Flajay Johnson, and he was shot and killed just months before she was born. This song was one of his handful of hits, but not something that really appeared on the national radar, really. And that's not a diss. It's just a bit of context. I'll explain why in a second. So everyone in the arena hears this, notices it right after the game ends is when it plays, including Flajay, who tweeted after, "I'll take my L on the chin, but this is just nasty behavior." Nothing funny about that. In the tweet, she was quote tweeting a screenshot from the DJ's Instagram where she was using a cry laughing emoji in regards to a comment about the song. Kim Mulkey talked about this. South Carolina issued a statement where they apologized and said the DJ was suspended for the game. And the DJ T.O., put out a statement where she apologized and said, "It was never my intent to disrespect or offend anyone," unquote. And I call BS. You didn't play a relatively obscure 24-year-old song by the late father of the losing team's star player right at the end of the game by accident. Throwing shade was absolutely your intent, and rubbing salt in the wound was absolutely your intent. And playing that song in that moment was intentional. And I just kind of thought it was way out of bounds and way out of line and below the belt. And I kind of think the DJ should have been fired. You can find other arena DJs pretty easily, and plenty others have been dismissed for much less. So needless to say, this is something that's just going to add more fuel to the fire between this rivalry of South Carolina and LSU, which, despite LSU losing 17 straight to the Gamecocks, I think it is a rivalry. And right now, it's the best in women's college basketball in the SEC, I think.
Another reason to hate on conference realignment. This is the only regular season installment we will get of this rivalry, which is unfortunate. Very unfortunate. I would love to see a return game in Baton Rouge. I'm sure we'll see this at some point in the SEC tournament. I agree with you. With all due respect to Camouflage, I don't think that it's a go-to that you play one of his songs.
Yeah, this isn't All I Do Is Win. You didn't play this by accident.
This is not DJ Khaled here. This is, or, We Are the Champions or something like that.
All due respect to Camouflage. Yeah, this is not in the regular rotation of DJs across the country.
Correct. And it's unfortunate that that's been the storyline as opposed to South Carolina. Once again, they don't have a star, but they've got enough monsters. The length was absurd in this game. It was on full display. defensively. I was trying to find the stat while you were explaining to the listeners about the DJ situation, Mitch, because I know it popped up during the broadcast. Maybe you have it. It was like 45 of 55 shots for LSU were contested by South Carolina, and by contested by definition, that was to say there was a hand in the face of the shooter. It was something crazy like that. And we said it last week. Every time I watch South Carolina, I go back to our concerns about they do not have that true back to the basket center that traditionally Dawn Staley has. But I mean, now former, thank you, Jesus. Now, former Jaguars general manager Trent Baalke really should go scout the South Carolina women's basketball team, because he's all about arm length. And Dawn Staley has been able to find players who fit not only the threshold, but exceed it when it comes to the measurables.
Yeah, I would like to see a rematch of this game, perhaps on a neutral court in the SEC tournament, just because, like, I'm looking at the team stats now. South Carolina took 26 free throws. They made 18 of them. LSU took 9 free throws. LSU won the rebounding battle by 12. And again,
shout out Anissa Morrow.
Yeah. And South Carolina wins this game by 10 points, despite making just 2 3-pointers, which I think is wild. But that's the defensive acumen of South Carolina. That's how this Dawn Staley coach team is going to win games. Defense and, every now and then letting Malaysia Fulwiley wreak some havoc.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Number 4 in this week's starting lineup. I am once again banging the table, begging Dawn to play Malaysia more. I saw people, which we appreciate our listeners, getting involved in the conversation on X. Make sure you follow both of us, and Blue Sky and all that good stuff. Malaysia has to earn her minutes. Next year's the year for her. I think she's, in terms of sheer athleticism, I think she's the most athletic player in the Southeastern Conference. Note I said the Southeastern Conference, though, Mitch, because we are going to pivot away to the ACC. Final score in Chapel Bill: Florida State 86, North Carolina 84. The Noles do it again for a second straight year. They knock off the Tar Heels in the state of North Carolina. It's a massive win for Florida State. Oh, and guess what? Another day at the office for Tanaya Latson, in which she had 25 points in this game, as well as, shockingly, perhaps only 4 boards, but 7 assists. So not quite the triple-double that she's become accustomed to. But another player who, when we talked last week about potential National Player of the Year names that we're not talking about, we forgot to include the Florida State standout, who I feel bad here in the state of Florida, because yes, Florida State, Florida haven't necessarily been LSU, South Carolina when it comes to women's basketball in terms of national relevance the last few years. Miami certainly had its run 2 years ago all the way to the Elite Eight, and I think that got them on the radar of even some casual women's basketball fans, casual basketball fans. Having the Cavender twins also helps. Story for another time. Point being, we need to talk about Tanaya Latson more. I want to make sure we include her and follow up from last week's conversation regarding National Player of the Year contenders who no one is talking about.
Yeah, just real quick on the Florida State North Carolina game. Last year when I was embedded with North Carolina and in some film sessions and stuff, I was in the film session before they played at Florida State, which was a game that North Carolina lost, I think by double digits. And the scout for that game, I remember Ettore Coleman, who is now an assistant coach at Virginia Tech, then in North Carolina. She identified Tanaya Latson as the head of the snake. She makes Florida State go, and that is certainly still true here in 2025. The other player that was heavy on that scouting report last year was Sarah Bigetti, who's no longer at Florida State. I believe she exhausted her eligibility. So I just kind of figured, I just don't think North Carolina had any business losing this game. I thought, home court advantage, you don't have Bigetti to worry about. They should get the job done, but no, Florida State turned it up on them. Florida State matched them in rebounding. Florida State sank 9 3-pointers. And then, you get the heroics of Tanaya Latson at the end. Tanaya Latson, by the way, scored 25 points without making a three-pointer in that game, which I think is
Well,
super
she didn't
impressive.
have to because Sydney Bowles had 6 3-pointers on her own. And that really, I think, was the dagger. Florida State made 9 threes in this game, against 6 of them courtesy of one player compared to 6 for the Tar Heels. The Tar Heels actually had a better field goal percentage in this game at 46.4%. Florida State only shot 40% from the floor, but I think that those threes certainly came back to haunt North Carolina, as well as a nice 15 of 16 mark for the Noles at the line.
Yeah. And the other thing that Florida State has this year, they still have Michaela Williams, and they have Malia Williams as well, which has given them a nice front court pairing, and I think has created some enforcers inside for them. So Tanaya Latson, great game-winning shot, also had 7 assists. Yeah, I think she's somebody who, as we look at kind of the player of the year race and sort of all Americans, you pick 5 players for your first team All-American team. I think that at this point in time, you could say that Hannah Hidalgo, Juju Watkins, Paige Beckers, and Lauren Betts are probably locks. But that 5th spot, I think Tanaya Latson is making a case for herself to be on that 5th spot. Florida State's won 3 in a row. They're ranked in the AP Top 25 poll this week at number 25. I think that the winning streak is probably going to continue. They play at Boston College, Wake Forest, at Virginia, before then playing home against NC State on February 9th, which will be a big game. And we'll see if the winning streak continues into that one.
See, Florida State fans, there's no need to pine over Mike Norvell losing recruits or Leonard Hamilton not aging like fine wine. Like, listen, just look at Tanaya Latson. There's hope. There's hope for you in the in the world of athletics. Since you mentioned her, let's wrap up this week's starting 5 with another player who you believe is in the National Player of the Year conversation, Mitch. She plays for the only undefeated team remaining in both men's and women's college basketball, and that is Lauren Betts of UCLA.
Yeah. So first I want to acknowledge that after voting Notre Dame at number 1 for a few weeks, I have pushed UCLA back into the number 1 spot on my AP Top 25 ballot. I did that because, UCLA is now the only undefeated team left in the sport, like you mentioned, and that means something. They're the only team to beat South Carolina and did so by double figures. This past week, they went 3-0, winning 2 road games and 1 in a neutral site, 2 of which were against ranked opponents, and all 3 were by at least 15 points or more. UCLA actually hasn't played a game where their margin of victory has been in single digits since their season opener in Paris against Louisville. On the OG, our friend Joe Giglio has talked about the Duke men's team potentially being a monster this year. And I think that this UCLA team in women's basketball very much is. I think they are the monster of the sport right now. They look kind of unbeatable at the moment. I mentioned the margin of victories, like they're beating everyone by double digits. We're going to find out for sure very soon. But for Lauren Betts, I think she still has the best value if you want to bet on somebody for the Wooden Award winner. Her line moved this week from plus 5,000 to plus 2,500, which is now 4th best behind Juju Watkins, Hannah Hidalgo, and Paige Beckers. But for each of those players, I think you can sort of make a case kind of tearing down their candidacy. Paige and Hannah have both battled injuries. Juju, I don't think, has quite lived all the way up to the hype this year as the superstar successor to Caitlin Clark. You could also make the case that Betts doesn't have really a true Robin to her Batman on this UCLA team, where all the other players do. Paige has Sarah Strong, Hannah has Olivia Miles, Juju has Kiki Iriafen and Rhea Marshall. UCLA has a collection of really great players around Lauren Betts. But if Betts isn't on this team, I'm not sure that they're 500, never mind undefeated. Betts is averaging 21 points per game. That's 14th nationally. 4.6 offensive boards per game, 6 nationally, 3 blocks per game, 4th nationally. She's also 4th in PER if you want to get into the advanced stuff. And I think, just simply put, she's the best player on the best team. And sometimes that's who this award goes to.
Isn't that the conversation we have with the NFL MVP? I feel like every year.
Yep, for sure. And then at Maryland, she scored 33 points, a career high. Against Baylor, she had 24 points, 9 boards, and 9 blocks, kind of flirting with a Mutombo-esque triple-double. I think Lauren Betts is a lock to be a first-team All-American. I think she's the best post player in the country, and she might be the best overall player in the country. We'll see.
Should be noted, Maryland did not have Cheyenne Sellers in that 15-point loss to UCLA. We'll get back to Maryland a little bit later in last call because I want your thoughts on where Brenda Friese's squad goes from here, Mitch. I also would like to note Kiki Rice is a player that on this podcast I know we've been critical of. When she arrived in Westwood, I think the expectation and also the fact that she was signed to do an ESPN Plus series with Caitlin Clark and Camila Cardoso, the expectation was that she would be Batman, that she did not need a Robin. Now she is maybe Robin. 19 points from her against the Terps was certainly a step in the right direction after injuries really affected her in the early goings of the season.
Yeah, she's definitely been better this year, for sure. I think she stepped up when she needed to, like you just mentioned, that 19 points at Maryland. I think Gabriella Jaquez has been great. London Jones.
Ivy's sister, for those of you who are unfamiliar.
Yeah, Janiyah Barker has played well here and there. They have a lot of really good pieces. I just think like it all revolves around Lauren Betts. Like she's the nucleus, and like I just think if she's not on this team, they kind of fall apart, which is what we saw last year, frankly, towards the end of the regular season when she wasn't around.
Yep.
UCLA
middle part of the season too, when they lost to USC, and it was like the wheels came off, and there was the confidence was shattered. What did Anthony Richardson say after he lost to Will Levis in Kentucky? Game 2 of his college career as a starter, and he said that like his confidence was broken after he lost to Will Levis in Kentucky. Like that's what it felt like. Kiki Rice and UCLA without Lauren Betts last year, lose to USC in a game that, I mean, USC just got hot and it happens. And it was as if their confidence was shattered. And it's like, relax. It's one game, but they allowed it to snowball. And that's where UCLA never really got to that undefeated form we saw during the non-conference slate last year.
Yeah, I think if somebody is going to get them, it's probably going to be either this February 5th game where they host Ohio State, who's been playing well when they have the Cambridge sisters in the lineup, or at USC, which is on February 13th. Those are the two games I'm kind of keeping an eye on. But also February 16th, they play Michigan State. Michigan State's been playing pretty well lately.
They have, for certain. Let's look ahead to this week, Mitch. The first game in this week's Chef's Table, our 3-game preview of the games we will have our eye on this upcoming week, is a team that you got to see firsthand in Carolina this week. Tell me more.
Yeah, so on Saturday, I drove out to Greenville. I stopped at Wawa on the way, which was great because we actually don't have a lot of Wawas in North Carolina, but lately, over the past, I think 2 years, we've had a couple open up in the eastern part of the state. So I got to have some Wawa coffee, and then I got to watch a really physical game that had a great finish between South Florida and East Carolina. It was, I think the game was tied up with just, about a minute or so to play. And then, USF made a layup to take the lead. And then East Carolina hit a 3-pointer with 5 seconds left to take a lead. And then Victoria, I'm going to mispronounce her last name probably, Blazik. She made a layup that was just awesome. I mean, 4 seconds left. She gets the inbounds pass, kind of spins around and just drives the baseline and throws up a shot behind her. It goes down. South Florida wins the game. There was a bit of a kerfuffle of some sort at the end of the game. So South Florida actually got to tack on 2 more technical free throws, courtesy of our friend Sammy Puisis. So I got to see South Florida, got to catch up with Jose Fernandez and see how their season's going. But yeah, they lead off our Chef's Table this week. This is Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN Plus. UTSA at USF. I wrote at 4 to win this week after this game, after talking to Jose and the Bulls. The American still runs through South Florida for women's college basketball. They've been the best team in this league for a while now.
Since UConn's departure.
For sure. And even when UConn was in the league, this was often a two-bid league. UConn would win the bid and South Florida would get like an at-large. So for probably, the past 10 years or so, they've got a collection of NCAA tournament, not only appearances, but wins, advancing to the second round a couple times. So they're 6-2 in the league this year, and UTSA right now is 8-0 in the league. So this is a big battle in the American. If somebody is going to really challenge and take down USF, it might be the Roadrunners. So I think that's going to be a very good game down in Tampa on Wednesday night.
Wednesday night in Tampa Town. That's your appetizer. The entree, we go back to that conference that I believe is the best in all of women's college basketball, the SEC.
Yeah, this is Thursday night, 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN2, Oklahoma at LSU. This one, I think all eyes are going to be on the paint. You got Reagan Beers on one side, you got Anissa Morrow on the other. Let the chips fall where they may. I think this is going to be a fun matchup. Should be another really good test. I mean, for both teams, really. Oklahoma's lost a couple games that they probably shouldn't have, frankly. And LSU, trying to bounce back, from that loss to South Carolina. I think playing another good ranked SEC team and beating them could go a long way in kind of not only their confidence, but building up their NCAA tournament resume. I know Kim Mulkey likes to complain when they don't get a number one seed or the seed that they feel like they should deserve. And I would say you should schedule harder in the non-conference play instead of playing Sisters of the Poor all the time.
But they're just trying to bring the girls back to their hometowns, and they can't help it that there's a D2 program there, Mitch, even though there might be a D1 program 25 minutes away. No, they can't help that. She's doing it for the kids. Main character. Main character Kim is doing it for the kids. She had to bring Michaela Williams back to wherever it is that Michaela Williams is from so that she could play, which was very nice. I do want to be clear. It's very kind of Kim to do that. But it's just very convenient then in turn, the level of competition that they choose to play while they are visiting their players' home states. That is number 7 LSU, number 13 Oklahoma. I think that one's going to come down to, Mitch, quite frankly, what we noted earlier between LSU and South Carolina. You need more out of Michaela Williams and you need more out of Flau'jae Johnson. And quite frankly, the shooting from outside of the paint for Oklahoma has been suspect at different times throughout the course of this up and down campaign for Jenny Baranchik's squad. And so I think whichever team makes more threes, bold prediction is who will win this week's entree.
Yeah. Peyton Velhurst is having a good season for them. I'm looking at their 3-point shooting numbers now. She's probably their best shooter at 36.1%. Lexi Keys comes off the bench and shoots 40%. But yeah, I think, you might be right. It might not be the paint. It might be beyond the arc.
Because I think the paint, they're kind of even,
Yeah, I think they might cancel each other out.
Right, because I think they're just going to dedicate so many resources on both ends of the defensive floor that they'll just clog up the paint in the hope that it's just make life as difficult as possible for Reagan Beers and Anissa Morrow. And if somebody else beats us, you tip your cap.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's wrap with a nice little dose of dessert in the ACC on Sunday.
Yeah, so this is Sunday at noon, also on ESPN2, Notre Dame at Louisville. I think, kind of somewhat quietly, Louisville has gone on a bit of a pretty hot streak here. They've won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of their last 9 games. I know we talked about Louisville a lot earlier this season about how much youth they have and how they kind of got to get it together. I think Jeff Walsh has figured some things out with this team. Louisville is not an easy place to play. They often lead the ACC in attendance. When I talked to players at ACC Media Day, I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, I asked a couple of players, where's your favorite place to play? And a lot of them said Louisville because they just love the environment there and how that arena is packed. Notre Dame still humming along, still stacking up wins, still got Olivia Miles. Hannah Hidalgo's back in the fold now after her brief absence for that injury. I think this is going to be an interesting game. This is at Louisville. Cardinals could give them a good fight. This is also, in the ACC and the new scheduling model this year, Notre Dame and Louisville are partnered up as kind of the protected rival. So they're going to play twice So this is the first of 2 meetings between these 2 teams. There will be a return game in South Bend later this season.
The Fighting Irish still have yet to lose on American soil. File that one away, folks. Very
True.
important stat. Look, I think that if you're listening to this because the calendar is about to flip to February and you say, hey, I'm ready, I'm sick of the Chiefs. I don't want to watch the Super Bowl. I want to get into women's college basketball. Caitlin Clark made me want to watch women's basketball last year. If you're looking for a team that, independent of your rooting interest, is just a fun watch and aesthetically pleasing to watch, I know Mitch noted that he voted UCLA #1 in his AP poll this week. But Notre Dame still, for me, in terms of aesthetically pleasing offensive basketball,
Yes.
between both the men and the women, by the way, because Tennessee and Auburn just put up clunkers on the men's side in a game that set the sport back. Outside of, dare I say, Todd Golden's Florida Gators, I'm not sure between both the men's and the women's side, there is a more fun product to watch than E.L. Ivy and Notre Dame right now.
Yeah, I love the way the Notre Dame plays. I couldn't take my eyes off them when they played in North Carolina earlier this year. They're going to play at NC State later this season. I'll be at that game for sure. But I just, that tandem of Hannah Hidalgo and Olivia Miles, it's the best backcourt in the country. They can do everything. And yeah, I still think that if you asked me, kind of gun to my head, who's your pick for the national champion right now, I would probably say Notre Dame over UCLA and South Carolina, just because I think that tandem is unstoppable. And then they have the depth up front in the post to withstand a postseason run and get the rebounds that you need in the postseason to make that happen. But yeah, if anybody's kind of jumping into women's basketball late here, tune in to Hannah Hidalgo and Olivia Miles for sure.
I just think it's a championship DNA too. It's a ton of fun to watch. Hannah Hidalgo, the energy that she gives off on the offensive and defensive end of the floor is absolutely contagious. You can feel it from your couch watching wherever you may be. You mentioned the Wolfpack. They will lead off this week's Making Money with Mitch segment. I noted we're not going to talk about last week's picks outside of shout out to LSU for covering the spread, albeit in a game that was pushed one day later to Friday. Mitch is 13-11 on the season, folks, and he's got 3 more games that'll help you make some money this week.
Yeah, the Tar Heels let me down this weekend, and so did my Navy midshipmen, unfortunately.
But the men won. The Navy men won. So
they did with TV Teddy doing that game, which was the first time he had ever apparently done Army Navy.
Interesting.
So
There's
yeah,
a first for everything.
Yeah, so TV Teddy loves the troops. So NC State on Thursday. This is 6 p.m. Eastern on ACC Extra, which is the streaming thing that the ACC has through the ESPN Plus app. They're playing at Wake Forest. Folks, Wake Forest is not good, and NC State is good. I've decided. NC State has won 5 games in a row now, most of them by pretty comfortable margins. They just beat Virginia Tech by 28. They beat Pitt by 16, Stanford by 14. Before that, they beat Boston College by 39. This is an NC State team that, despite some of their flaws that we've talked about, they can score in bunches. They can fill it up with Sanaya Rivers, Isaiah James, Zoe Brooks, Madison Hayes. Tilda Trigger is coming along, freshman for them from Sweden, and she's playing really well at center. I think she's, kind of a stopgap for them and, tidying up some things in the front court there. So the spread on this game is 14.5, and I think NC State will cover it. No problem. I just don't think Wake Forest is very good, and I think NC State is. So there's that.
Let's hope another team in the triangle helps you out in the Wolfpack compared to the Heels last week. We already mentioned Vanderbilt and Georgia Tech, our other trendy, fun team we love to root for here on the women's basketball podcast, college edition, I guess I should say, is Cal. And Mitch is rolling with an underdog Cal against the aforementioned Tar Heels.
Yeah. So this game is also Thursday. This is at 10 p.m. Eastern, also on ACC Extra. This is the North Carolina Tar Heels at Cal. North Carolina is favored by 5.5. And I just, Cal has only lost 3 games this year. And they've only lost 1 at home, and that was to Michigan State by 6 points. And I think, the Cal is really hard to beat at home, I think, especially in ACC play. This is the first year that a lot of these ACC teams are going to the West Coast for this road swing of Cal and Stanford. And so far, like I said, Cal is undefeated at home in ACC play and only one loss at home on the whole year. So I think that travel bug is going to play a factor, and I think Cal is just a really good team, and they should be able to get after North Carolina at home. I don't know if they'll win straight up, but I think that they can cover 5.5 and at least make this game close, and kind of, hold true to that home court advantage that they have.
I just can't help but feel like this is Vegas saying North Carolina has to get right after such a heartbreaking loss at home
Yeah.
against Florida State. That's what this line says to me.
Yeah, I mean, Cal has beaten some good teams in there. I mean, they beat NC State by 7 points at home earlier this year. They've beaten Stanford at home. They beat Alabama at home, Arizona, Gonzaga. Like they've beaten some good teams in their house. Whatever it is, I think for the ACC, a big factor is making that cross-country trip, for your traditional ACC schools, which North Carolina is one of. So we'll see kind of how that impacts the Tar Heels. But if it's been like the other schools, I think Cal's not going to have a problem keeping it at least close with the Tar Heels.
NC State minus 14.5, Cal plus 5.5. We wrap this week's 3-game parlay. If we want to call it a parlay, maybe it's just 3 independent picks. In the Big 12, one conference we haven't spoken about on today's episode, Mitch. West Virginia, a 7.5-point favorite at home against Oklahoma State, a surging Cowgirl squad of sorts at times.
Yeah. This is Sunday at noon on ESPN Plus /ESPNU. And I like West Virginia to cover the 7.5 and get the victory. West Virginia just 4 losses on the season, but a lot like Cal, they've only lost at home 1 time this year. And that loss was to Texas, who is pretty good. And that loss was only by 5 points. So Morgantown, for whatever reason, has been an incredibly tough place to play. For everybody. They're undefeated at home in Big 12 play. They just put the hurting on Iowa State there, 2 weeks ago. They beat Colorado at home, and kept it really close with a really good Texas team at home. So Morgantown, tough place to play. Also West Virginia lost a game at Oklahoma State earlier this season by 7 points. I think that can flip the other way, and the Mountaineers get back on the Cowgirls.
Cowgirls have won 3 straight, but yes, this is a West Virginia team that maybe we slept on them a little bit too much after they almost brought Iowa to the brink at Carver Hawkeye Arena last year. People forget both West Virginia and Colorado nearly Iowa's kryptonite at different points over the last 2 years. Now Iowa is its own worst enemy, but that's a story for another time. # not worried about Iowa. I love the play because as much as the Cowgirls, yes, have won 3 straight, Mitch, I do like West Virginia, especially in a Big 12 that's as wide open as it's ever been, as we discussed last week. It's time for last call, the storylines we missed on today's episode that we want to get to you guys before we get on out of here. I begin in Columbia, South Carolina, where, look, I don't feel bad for Dawn Staley for many reasons. Number 1, she's an amazing head coach. Number 2, she won the national championship. Number 3, she just got a very lucrative contract extension. However, Mitch, for the second time in 3 years, Dawn Staley will have to coach a top 10 matchup with SEC championship implications on the line the day that her Philadelphia Eagles play in the Super Bowl. Poor Dawn. I feel so every time I see her on the sidelines of a game that I know there's like football is about to start or South Carolina's preemptively leading into football, and I see she's got one of her Eagles bomber jackets on, I'm like, oh, poor Dawn. She wishes she was watching the game, right? Like they couldn't help Dawn out. Like of all the coaches in women's college basketball that you could have planned around, help Dawn out, please.
What jersey do we think Dawn is going to rock on the sideline that day?
Saquon.
Do we think
Saquon?
Okay.
We can put that in the Making Money with Mitch segment. Producer Dimitri, if you're listening, you could throw in like Mia's face with put a face on it. I think she's going to be rocking Saquon, although I guess we've got 2 weeks to find that out. But early prediction, it will be Saquon Barkley.
I've seen her wear the Hurts before. I think I've seen her break out. I have a memory of her wearing like a Kelly Green Randall Cunningham at some point. That was really sweet.
That.
I don't I don't have any sympathy for Dawn Staley in this regard, just because I'm tired of watching the Eagles play the Chiefs, and did not want to see. This was the Super Bowl matchup that I just didn't want. My father-in-law is a Buffalo Bills fan, and my stepdad and my best man in my wedding are both longtime fans of the professional football team in Washington, D.C. So I was rooting for the opposite matchup. But I guess go Birds. Sure.
Same in this household. That's why I said I'm sure some of our listeners are just done with the Eagles and Chiefs. And like many of you who may be listening in Duval County, because you follow me for your Jaguars coverage, you have your new head coach, and you'll probably have your GM in the next week or so. Hopefully not before this podcast debuts. That would probably violate some Rooney rules. So yeah. So with that said, if you're not paying attention to coaching search season, you're probably not paying attention to that matchup, or at the very least the lead up to it. So listen to women's college basketball. Watch women's college basketball. Poor Dawn Staley. She will be rooting for her Birds. She will still be caring about the two teams left in the road to New Orleans, as we like to call it, on the media front, Mitch, because you can't say that SB word technically.
Right.
Road to New Orleans, the big game. I digress. One game that I had my eye on yesterday while the conference championship games were going on. I had it on TV too. That was TCU and Baylor. Obviously, we've been following the redemption story of Haley Van Lith, TCU, Sedona Prince. I was explaining to my boyfriend, Kevin, for Haley Van Lith, every time I see videos of her in the locker room in the post game with this TCU team, and she just looks like she's on the verge of tears, and it's happy tears because she looks like she is genuinely enjoying basketball again. It warms my heart. It brings us back to the days of when she was playing for Jeff Walls, and she was merely just another great basketball player and hadn't joined a super team, the Evil Empire in Baton Rouge. And that's what she's doing now at TCU, although I'm not going to lie. They were in front. I think it was by 14 points, the Horned Frogs. They led by 14 or something like that, double digits heading into the fourth quarter of this game yesterday. And suddenly I look up and it's a 3-point ball game. Final score TCU 80, Baylor 75. It's a shout out and part of our last call because it's TCU's first win over Baylor since 1990. I think that says more about Kim Mulkey and her predecessors and the previous era of Bears basketball than it does the current iteration of TCU. So credit to the Horned Frogs for a big win. And a little close for comfort, but wow.
I'm now the proud owner of a Haley Van Lith Bowman first card that I got recently, and some cards that I bought on the internet.
Okay, cool.
Just bought some cards. Yeah. But yeah, so little treat for our YouTube viewers there. If you're listening, Haley Van Lith, shout out to her.
Shout out to Haley Van Lith. Shout out to TCU. No, that was an emotional win over their friends, or their enemies, I should say, up in Waco. Saying in the Lone Star State, do we need to give more? Do we need to give Taylor Jones more credit, Mitch, for Texas's success? She was huge in the paint in both the aforementioned 80-76 win over Tennessee, the somehow, someway victory over Ole Miss on the road Sunday afternoon. I know when it comes to Texas, we want to talk Madison Booker. We want to talk Rory Harmon, but I do think we need to give Taylor Jones her flowers as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think she's a big part of their success recently. You mentioned 21-14 against Tennessee, 24 points against Ole Miss, 13-9 against Maryland. She's a force, and certainly for them in the paint. I think a big reason why they have success down low. She's somebody that, when she's on the court for Texas, she usually makes a good impact. I was looking up Taylor Jones' stats a little bit, and I didn't realize this is her 6th season of women's college basketball. She played 3 years at Oregon State, her final season, cut short by injury, and this is now her 3rd year at Texas. So she's been around a while, veteran player, probably a good thing to pair her up with Madison Booker for sure.
Absolutely. So shout out to Taylor Jones. This one's not so much a shout out as much as it is something we were discussing on X, Mitch. Trying to understand the Big 12 race, trying to understand why the SEC may be the best conference in women's college basketball. What do those two things bear correlation to? Kansas State taking a step back without Ayoka Lee. Explain more.
Yeah, I just, like I said on the podcast last week, this Kansas State team would not be the same without Ayoka Lee, and so far that seems to be true. They lost to Colorado 63-53,
And this
they
was a game
had
that I watched, Mitch, and, like, in the
mhm.
first half, it was a competitive two-possession ball game, and this was a Kansas State team that quite literally looked like it ran out of gas in the second half, and there was nothing Jeff Mittie and company could do about it.
Yeah, and I think what they tried to do, but because they didn't have Ayoka Lee, was they tried to take a bunch of threes. The problem is that they missed a lot of threes. They shot 8 of 28, only 28%. Usually that's not quite good enough to win a game for you. And in this case, it wasn't. I don't really know what's going to happen with this Kansas State team. Like I said last week, I was going to come on the podcast and be like, Kansas State, we should be talking about them as a contender. But this team is just not the same without Ayoka Lee. And their schedule doesn't get any easier. They're going to play Iowa State at home. I don't know how much Iowa State has figured things out. I saw a bracketology thing recently that had Iowa State and Iowa in a play-in game in a
Oh my
first four game.
god.
And I can't imagine what that would do to the
But
great
where
state
would they
of
have
Iowa.
it? Where would it take place?
It would take place wherever the host pod would be. So
Okay.
if they're both like 11 seeds, would they be? I'm not sure exactly, but so they might play in like South Carolina.
Right, well, that's what I was gonna say, like, the
Yeah.
irony would not be lost on me if all of these people of Iowa have to drive to South Carolina because 'cause they're Iowans, they drive, and they seek the warmer weather and their women's basketball, and they have to go all the way to South Carolina to watch 2 teams that are separated by an hour and 45 minutes.
Right. Yeah. So that would be super interesting. The Iowa fans and Iowa State, they do travel really well. I mean, I went to a lot of road games with Iowa last year, or in the past years through the tournament and stuff, and saw a lot of black and yellow in the crowds. And then a couple of years ago, Iowa State was in the Sweet 16 in Greensboro, and pretty good showing for the Cyclones, despite being several hours away. So that would be fun. But back to the Big 12 race. Yeah, this Kansas State team is not the same team without Ayoka Lee. It's going to be a tough kind of sledding ahead. They got Iowa State twice. They got to play TCU. They got to play West Virginia. They got to play Oklahoma State. There's a lot of really tough games ahead for them, and they kind of have to figure out what kind of team they're going to be until she gets back, if she comes back.
Speaking of teams that will be without their star players, or at least have been without their star players, we noted earlier, no Cheyenne Sellers for Maryland and their 15-point loss to UCLA over the weekend. I put this one in last call on our rundown, Mitch, as simply this: Maryland is blank. Fill in the blank for me. What do you make of Brenda Friese's squad on January 27th as we're recording this podcast?
Down bad right now. They're not in a good place. I think a little bit similarly to Ayoka Lee. And we've talked about kind of this term before this season. Cheyenne Sellers is the bus driver for this team, and I just don't really think they have a chance of beating other good teams like your Ohio States and your UCLA's if she's not on the court. I think they can manage the Bree McDaniels injury. She's out for the rest of the year, and that's unfortunate. But I think they can get by, without Bree McDaniels. But Cheyenne Sellers, if you're Maryland, if you're a Maryland fan, if you want to see this team, potentially compete for a Big Ten title, if you want to see them go far in the NCAA tournament and make the second weekend, you need Cheyenne Sellers back in the fold. The good thing for Maryland is they got a pretty easy kind of get-right game coming up. They're going to play Penn State, which is one of the worst teams in the Big Ten.
Hey, now, they did knock off Ohio State. Don't you forget.
They did knock off the Cambridge's Cambridge-less Ohio State team earlier this month. But yeah, so they got Penn State, they got Illinois. Illinois is a good team. Oregon's a good team. Washington, so their schedule kind of gets a little bit easier and evens out a bit after having to play 3 games in a row against really good ranked teams, Texas, Ohio State, and UCLA. So I think the Terps will probably use kind of like this last month of February, just make sure the Cheyenne Sellers gets healthy. and try to figure out some other things in terms of what you can do when she's not on the court. But I think as far as like the ceiling for this team, it gets lower if Cheyenne Sellers is not able to be 100%.
One more note from the college front, and I don't know if producer Dimitri wants to welcome himself on. This will be, I think, his first audio appearance on this podcast. Here he is, folks.
Howdy, gang.
He's going to tell you guys about the team and the jersey combination that you should be paying attention to.
The Hawaii Rainbow Wahine will be wearing a fan-designed jersey, and I think we all agreed, maybe I just decided in our group chat that we all agreed, that these are magnificent jerseys.
Yes.
I'm just glad I'm glad I made the decision and the audible, pun intended, to have you explain the Wahine, because I would have butchered that pronunciation. So I'm glad that you said it first.
Years of working with a sports radio station in Honolulu gave me all of the background. And on top of that, Mia may know this. Mitch, I don't know if you do. I am a diehard fan of the Bows, to the point that I always have my old school mini helmet here. But here's what I love about the uniform, right? So it's designed by a fan who is from Colorado State. They are flying him out for the game, which, like, geez, I wish I
Billy Gilday in Cartersville. I love it.
Yeah, only on Oahu, like considerably better.
No offense to Trevor Lawrence's hometown, but Oahu, Cartersville, Georgia. Yeah, there's a little bit of a difference there.
So here are a couple things I love about it. Number one, the shorts have a design that is supposed to be like a traditional Hawaiian tribal tattoo. It actually mirrors what is on the football team's pants. The rainbow design of Hawaii is a play on this old football helmet. It is a red, yellow. The word Hawaii is written in green, and then the blue stripe is underneath. And this is something you've got to be a true Bows fan to know. That H is a play on the basketball team's logo from the 80s.
Okay.
Like, clearly,
has home field apparel been alerted to this? Because I think we need to alert them.
I will give Josh and Connor a quick text here when we are done. That actually is why I knew exactly what I was looking at when I saw that H. I have loved Hawaii sports for a long, long time, since before I started doing work for that radio station. I am pleased as punch to get them talked about here on the Women's Basketball Podcast.
I love it.
Yeah, I'm reading a story now on HawaiiNewsNow.com, and it says that
your only news source.
Yeah, I visit there often. No, the uniforms apparently are called Surf City with a UH in the middle of the word surf, which I think is cool. But yeah, like Mia said, if these were available in some form or fashion, T-shirts, hoodies, whatever, on home field, or any retailer for that matter, I would certainly buy something, because these are awesome. And I think Hawaii should wear them all the time, not just for the special game where they're apparently trying to raise some money for something.
Yeah, they're trying to raise money, as the athletic department is always operating in debt in Hawaii. It's very expensive to run a Hawaii athletic department. But the other part is they are also trying to set the record for the largest women's sports crowd of any type at Hawaii. And that's a big deal, because as much on the mainland as we think about football and basketball, it's volleyball in Hawaii. So if the women's basketball team was able to eclipse the volleyball team, that'd be something.
Yeah, it says, again, Hawaii News Now. Thank you very much. The all-time record for a women's basketball game in Hawaii was set in 1998 at 6,192 fans. So cool. I hope it happens. That's awesome.
I suggested this earlier, and then I'll let you guys go and wrap up the show. They are auctioning these jerseys off after the game. I have suggested a sort of secret Santa thing for the program this year, where we all know we're getting Hawaii game used jerseys.
I would wear mine. I'd rock mine every single day. By the way, this is a Hawaii team that's currently in second in the Mountain West. They're 7-2 in their conference. Like, I mean, they're 13-6 overall. This is a pretty good team too. It's not like this is some gimmick, folks. I'm here for it.
Yeah, I did not realize until we were gonna, start talking about them, that they were that good this year. So that's awesome to see.
Shout out Hawaii. Shout out our friends at Unrivaled. Weekend number 2, I should say, officially wrapping up. My biggest takeaway from weekend number 2, Mitch, of a Friday, Saturday, Monday slate. Poor Brianna Stewart just wants to win a game. She just, you see her body language at the end of all these games because the miss, they just can't figure it out, despite Rakia Jackson, who, as I noted, was my biggest takeaway from weekend number 1. I thought that team would be led by Stewie and Jewel Lloyd, and it would just be the 2-man game, and everybody else just wasn't even really on the court. But I was very impressed with a lot of their supporting cast. But they struggled to win games, and Stewie's like, what the hell? I invented this league. Fee's over here with the Lunar Owls with the best mascot and the best jersey combination, and they can win games, and I can't, and it's no fair.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that, Stewie is, going through it a little bit. Meanwhile, Fee leads the league in both scoring and rebounding, 27.5 points, 12.8 rebounds per game. So, Fee is thriving in the 3-on-3, which is awesome to see. I just wanted to mention that I noticed DraftKings is running some lines on Unrivaled games, so
Let's
you can
go.
bet.
Love
You can
that.
bet on Unrivaled, which
right.
is kind of fun. I haven't done it yet, just because I haven't watched close enough to like really, kind of make some smart plays. But
I'm gonna do it in game. I mean, we don't have DraftKings in Florida, unfortunately. So maybe our friends at Hard Rock will add it to
there
the
you
slate.
go. Yeah.
I hope they do. I would like to put a bow on today's show by circling back to the first item in our starting 5 and tying it to our Unrivaled recap to say that the real winner in the Jewel Lloyd Kelsey Plum sweepstakes is it's Kelly. Wow. Kate Martin, because Kate Martin remains the face of the Golden State Valkyries, because Kelsey Plum did not get traded to the Golden State Valkyries, as so many predicted and thought that she would team back up with so many of her former cohorts, compatriots from the Las Vegas Aces who have made their way to the Bay Area, whether that is through the expansion draft or becoming the head coach or the assistant coach. Instead, Kelsey Plum heads to SoCal and back home where she's from, 2.5 hours up the road from San Diego, I suppose. And shout out Kate Martin. Not only is she out here hitting game-winning shots, dropping double-doubles and Unrivaled, she still is the face right now of a WNBA franchise, at the very least until free agency picks up.
Yeah, and she's playing really well and Unrivaled, to the point where, like, I saw it kind of sparked some discussion online about, like, oh, are the Aces regretting letting Kate Martin go? I don't know. They had a pretty crowded, room. I think Kate Martin is probably happy to go to a team where she can get kind of full playing time and, has the chance to, shine a little bit. But yeah, she's playing really well on Unrivaled, and I think she's going to have a great year too in the W. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the Valkyries do to kind of put around her.
Shout out Kate Martin. Shout out Unrivaled. Mitch, where will we be able to find you this week?
Yeah, I'm at For the Win. You can go read my story about South Florida and the Bulls and Jose Fernandez. You can also find me at North Carolina Public Radio, and I'm on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, and Blue Sky and Instagram and all the fun things. I'm easy to find.
I will be on all those things as well. Although I no longer have to worry about a head coaching search. Now we just got coaching staff here in Jacksonville, and the GM search still pending with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So yes, keep it locked on X, Instagram, all the good stuff from yours truly. I also will be on the call Wednesday night on the men's side on ESPN Plus between the top 2 teams in the A-Sun Conference. Jacksonville University currently holding a 1-game lead, or a half-game lead, I guess it is technically, whatever it is, over Florida Gulf Coast. And so I'll have the call of that one this week as well. He's Mitch. I'm Mia saying so long. We will catch you next week.
Deuces.